basically, I think I'll start the session off. So yeah, welcome again, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As you can see, I'm not Danny Clark. My name's actually Charlotte Cork, and I'm the product manager for Simply People. I'm working closely with Danny Clark, who's the founder of Simply People, who some of you may already know. So just very briefly, tell you a little bit about Simply People. We're connecting a community to improve the physical and mental health and well-being of employees in the workplace, and we're the fastest growing occupational health and wellbeing community in the UK. So we help organisations who need occupational health services to find the right provider first time, and also offer a free independent triage service to employers who are not quite sure how to navigate the territory and access those services. Also, supporting occupational health providers is a key part of what Simply People does, by providing a range of support for the provider community, skills development, and of course, by hosting events like this one. So many of the events that we do are done in collaboration with leading organisations in the field, and today's webinar on management of noise is no exception. And we're very grateful to our friends at the Cast Metals Federation for supporting today's session, and Richard from there will be hosting the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have got any questions, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and then Richard will bring those up during the presentation or at the time, probably towards the end when we'll have time for questions. There's also a chat box if you want to communicate with us or other participants. So today's session, we're very grateful to Chris Steele for delivering today's session. Chris is a noise and vibration specialist inspector from the Health and Safety Executive. He carries out inspections and investigations of workplaces, focusing on noise at work, hand and arm vibration, and whole body vibration issues. Chris has worked in noise and vibration controls for more than 20 years, moving from product development to consultancy to academia to regulations. You may also be interested in our Management of Vibration webinar that Chris delivered for us back in December. That's available as a recording via the Simply People website. But without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Chris to take us through today's session.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'm Chris Steele, and as you say, I'm a noise and vibration inspector with the Health and Safety Executive. The last talk I did for Cast Metals Federation was very much about hand-arm vibration. So this one's going to be all about workplace noise. During the last talk, we spent a lot of time going through sort of hierarchy of control. We were going on about halves, and this one's going to be a bit different because we're talking about noise. Now, normally when I talk about noise at work, just like with halves, I'll spend a lot of time talking about the hierarchy of control. But because we tend to find that people focus on PPE, i.e. hearing protection, I thought what I'd do for this talk, which is something I haven't done in the past 5 years, is actually do a talk which is focused more on PPE and the types of issues that we come across. So this is the HSE's suitcase of shame. This is kept in a locked cabinet at our labs in Buxton, and if you have a look inside it, you'll find that there's an array of severely damaged and very poor looking hearing protection. Every single thing that's in that box was confiscated from a worker on a work site by one of our inspectors. So everything that you see here was being used to protect hearing. Now some of it looks okay, so if you look at the top line there, you'll see that the yellow one, that kind of looks all right, but actually if you go inside it, you'll find that all the foam's been taken out. Some of it looks, you know, interesting. So there's the one there with a sort of curly cable coming out of it. That isn't actually a communications headset. The individual there had taken the speakers out the door in their car and put them in the hearing protection because they wanted to listen to music and they wanted it to be loud enough so that it was noise, higher noise level than what they were listening to in their workplace. All of it was in use. We have things like this, these communication headsets here. The issue being that the company had spent quite a lot of money on it and were not prepared to spend money on replacing them when they got damaged or needed to be repaired. And so the employees were left to try and patch them up over a number of years. But generally the types of things we see are hearing protection that's just burst, the sort of thing that's been rolling about in the back of a work van for about 3 years or hanging on a nail next to a machine gathering dust. The point that you hopefully should be getting here is not that employees don't know how to look after the hearing protection. The point you should be getting here is that if you have to use hearing protection, it has to be managed, that's an expectation. Not only does the hearing protection have to be managed, but also the fact that people are wearing it. We want you to make sure that they're wearing it. Now, I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong, but I'm absolutely pretty sure that there aren't any earplugs that work based on the proximity to an ear. They have to actually be in the ear to work. Similarly, if they're in the ear, they have to be in the ear the right way around. They can't just be parked in the ear. And if you're having difficulty getting a supply of hearing protection, rolling up balls of paper and sticking them in your ear isn't a suitable method of control. And this photograph was taken in 2019, so we still see that. Now, the interesting thing about this photo, where this chap's parked his earplug, and this one where this chap has put tissue paper in their ear, is that both these individuals are trying to draw attention to a problem. In this case, the problem that was trying to be drawn attention to the inspector who was walking round was, I haven't had any training or any information on how I'm supposed to wear these. I don't know if I'm wearing them correctly. For this chap here, he was pointing out the fact that even though he works in a high noise environment, they'd ran out of earplugs, and he was trying to alert the inspector to the fact that the earplugs were no longer being supplied. PPE creates an issue for you that we expect you to manage. So we've said that already. The other thing that we tend to find when we speak to people about why have you went straight for PPE and not looked at the things higher up in the hierarchy of control is they say, well, it's really difficult to get noise levels down. And even when we do all this work, sometimes we only get a couple of dB, 3 decibels of a reduction. Now, the thing that we need to make clear at this stage is the HSE are not the local authority environmental noise team. We are not looking for you to drop noise levels by 20 and 30 dB so that somebody lying in their bed at night can't hear sound from you. We just want you to control noise to a reasonably practical level, and sometimes getting small reductions in noise can be sufficiently, big enough for us to say you've done what we expect you to do. Why is that? Well, let's think about that 3 decibel reduction. In terms of perception, that's barely audible. That's about the least you would hear if you change the volume on your TV is about 3 decibels. But in terms of risk, in terms of the actual risk that you're creating, you can, if you drop 3 decibels off the noise level, you can reduce the risk by 50%. So how are we managing that? Well, let's say you work in a noise environment with the noise levels of 87 dB, so you're right up at the top of the upper exposure action value. We absolutely expect you to have health surveillance. We absolutely expect you to be putting in control measures, have a risk assessment, and probably have hearing protection. That's 158 points. Knock 3 decibels off of that, and you're now between the lower and upper exposure action value, which means that hearing protection isn't mandatory. You just provide it and people decide whether they're going to wear it. You don't always have to provide health surveillance, but we still expect you to have some sort of risk assessment and control. But the number of points there is 79 points, so we've half the amount of exposure. Okay, so what are you going to get by the end of this? What am I trying to get across to you? So what I want you to know what HSE inspectors get told about hearing protection. Everything that I'm telling you today is what I tell the inspectors when I do internal training for the HSE. So when they go out to site, they see the same sorts of things. Now they get a bit more, but generally this is the sort of information that they get. Second thing is that you'll know what HSE inspectors are looking for from companies that are using hearing protection. You're going to see the types of questions that they're going to ask, and you'll get an idea of what's going through the inspector's head when he sees certain things on site. Okay, so let's start off with the most obvious thing that we see when we go on site. We get to a workplace, we get to a workshop, and we see this sign. This sign to our inspectors indicates to them that wherever you're going to go into, it's mandatory hearing protection in this area. Whether it's a workshop, whether it's an area, once you walk through that door, you should expect to see people wearing hearing protection, assuming that it's noisy. So you walk through the door, it's noisy, people aren't wearing hearing protection, then that is you potentially in a position where the inspector will take enforcement against you. So if some of them aren't wearing it, or it's kind of a bit patchy, they might have a chat with you, they might issue a formal letter, a knock letter. But if we walk through the door, it's really noisy, you've got the sign up and no one's wearing hearing protection, then you're potentially looking at an improvement notice for that. Something else this sign also tells our inspectors. So they see it, they expect to see hearing protection, but they also expect to see something else. Another thing that they expect to see, and the question that they will ask, is do you have health surveillance? Now, whether or not you've got health surveillance and when you're supposed to have it can seem like quite a convoluted route, but essentially, If you're above the upper exposure action value, that's mandatory hearing protection. If it's mandatory hearing protection, i.e. an average daily level of 85 dB, then we expect there to be health surveillance provided. So if they see that sign, they will ask you about health surveillance. So why is health surveillance important to you? Why is it important to the HSE? Well, health surveillance is important to the HSE because it's seen as a backstop. We understand that you do your risk assessment, you put your control measures in place, you've got your information, instruction and training, your hearing protection, and then at the end of it, you do your health surveillance to check that all those control measures are working. And if you find that people are getting ill, then you're supposed to go back through that process again. And you're supposed to act on ill health as a result of it. So if you don't have the health surveillance, you can't demonstrate that you're checking that when people started, their hearing was at this level, when they left, it was at the same level, or maybe it deteriorated, but you understand why. And you're able to control the risk. The other reason why it's specifically important for people that are duty holders is to do with your employer's liability compulsory insurance. Whether or not people have got health surveillance in place is usually the thing that allows employees to be able to take claims against you as an employer, because they can demonstrate that they've been made ill, they've got noise-induced hearing loss, and if on the balance of probabilities they worked for you and it was noisy and they can demonstrate that, then because it goes through a civil court, they can put a claim in against you. So how does that look? When we look at the amount of people that are putting in employer liability claims, then just for health, so these are just the health claims, you'll find that occupational disease is by far the largest single reason why people claim. It may not be the single most expensive, but it's certainly the biggest number of claims that you're likely to get for ill health. It's larger than the next 9 largest reasons why people claim for ill health at the work. So it's important to HSE that you've got health surveillance. It's important to you as an employer that you've got health surveillance. If you don't have health surveillance, the HSE is potentially going to take enforcement against you. If it's patchy, again, it might be verbal advice, it might be a formal letter. If it's completely absent, and we know that there's a risk of noise, and if you've had someone who's maybe had a diagnosis and you don't have it, so maybe they went to their own doctor and they found out that they've got noise-induced hearing loss, and you've not taken action, or you've had your health surveillance done and you haven't put in action, we'll take enforcement against you. Similarly, if you're using a health surveillance provider who doesn't know what they're doing, we'll take action against them. One of the examples I remember was we took action against a company where the health surveillance provider, the only formal qualifications that person had was that they used to be a hypnotist, and the company had not checked that. So check the people that are providing you health surveillance are qualified to be doing it. Okay, so we saw the types of poor conditions that hearing protection can get into, and these things are probably a bit extreme, but what sort of things should you be looking for when you're having a quick look around to see, is my hearing protection in good condition? What sort of nick is it in? Well, I use an acronym called CUF, which means condition. What conditions is the hearing protection in? Is it being used? Does it fit? Is it fit around the ear? And is it fit for purpose? So, and it helps me remember that because you get a cuff around the ear when you were a kid if you did things that were wrong. So let's start off with the condition of the hearing protection. Well, we've seen before some poor examples. One thing to kind of point out, this set of ear muffs here, perfectly satisfactory when you see them from a distance. You don't notice that the seals are burst until you ask the person to come into a back room or into the lunchroom and have a chat with you. And when they remove them, you notice that the seals are gone. So sometimes a visual inspection, you know, even as you're walking past somebody, might not tell you everything you need to know about it. So it's worth checking to see what condition that they're in. If the HSE finds you using hearing protection that's in poor condition, again, you're running risk of enforcement. If it's just a few cases of it, it might be a verbal warning, it might be a formal letter or a knock letter. If it's widespread and it's across the board, then you're moving into improvement territory. Okay, so we've looked at condition. What about the use? Are people using it? Is it actually being worn? We found that 40% of people were unsuccessfully using the hearing protection. Now you'll obviously say, well, Chris, come on, 60% of the companies you went out to visit were managing to use it correctly. But let's just put a bit of meat on the bones here. We phoned these companies up. We told them we were coming. We told them what day we were coming. And we told them we were coming to talk to them about hearing protection. And we still found that 40% of those people weren't wearing their hearing protection correctly. 40% of those companies weren't wearing hearing protection properly. So they knew we were coming, they knew why we were coming, and they knew when we were coming. So what sort of things are they getting wrong? Well, it's not the plugs falling out and they haven't noticed. One of the things that we see quite a lot is this sort of example here. You're in a high noise environment, someone's having a chat with you, you've removed your hearing protection for a few minutes because you think it'll be easier to have a conversation. You will be surprised at how that will drastically reduce the performance of your hearing protection. Removing it even for short periods of time reduces the performance so much that it's probably not worth you having it on. Normally, if you've got hearing protection that provides 30 dB attenuation, you wear it 100% of the time, you get 30 dB attenuation. If you wear it for 75% of the time, you only get 6 dB attenuation. And the question that you should probably be asking yourself when you're walking around your workplace is, what is the wear rate of my staff? What are they? How long are they wearing it? What's the wear rate? And it's a question that your inspector might ask you. What's the wear rate of your hearing protection? Can you make an estimate of it? Do you ever see people taking it off when they probably shouldn't? Right, what about fit? Does it fit the ear? So we're not just talking about, is it comfortable? And that clearly is an issue, but we're also talking about, have they actually put it on properly? So banded ear muffs, well, the band's supposed to go over the top of the head. That's the starting point. If it's over the back of the head, it's probably not working so well. And the seal, that's supposed to seal the skin around the ear. It's not supposed to be sealing the side of your hood and the glasses to the side of your head. And we see a range of these issues. Some of them we're likely to take more of a dim view on than others. We're probably not too concerned about a pair of lightweight safety glasses breaching the seal on some hearing protection, but certainly balaclavas and hats and these types of things are an issue, and you are running the risk of getting improvement notices and knock letters, formal letters on information, instruction and training and on control. Let's have a quick look at that little thing in the middle there where we've got the earplugs. That photograph on your left, that is what those standard yellow sort of ubiquitous earplugs are supposed to look like when they're in your ear. If I was wearing them right now and facing onto you directly, you shouldn't really be able to see them sticking out of my ear. It's only when I turn to one side you would be able to see them. If they're stuck out like in the Shrek position, then they're probably not in right. Now that might be because the person doesn't understand how to wear them, but this comes back to another issue, which is sometimes this type of hearing protection and sometimes other types of hearing protection aren't suitable for people. So for example, I can get one of these plugs in this ear all the way, but I can't get it all the way into that ear because of the differences in the ear canal size. So you should be establishing which type of hearing protection is suitable for the people that you have under your employment. Okay, what about fit for purpose? What are we looking at in terms of fit for purpose? Well, we're talking about the actual performance of the hearing protection. If you go in our guidance document, you'll find a little table in it, looks like this, and it tells you things like if you work in a noise environment or you're using a piece of equipment that's about 90 to 95 dB, you should be providing hearing protection, which gives an attenuation of about 20 to 30 decibels. Because we want you to be able to provide a minimum amount of protection without providing too much protection. And the only way you're going to know that is by doing a risk assessment. So if you don't know the answers to that, if we come to site and we say, you know, what attenuation ear protection are you using? How does that fit in with your control measures and your noise levels? If you don't know, it signifies to us that you might not have a risk assessment. And if you don't have a risk assessment, then again, you're running the risk of having enforcement taken against you. So if it's patchy, you've got a risk assessment, but it's not very good. Maybe you've forgotten about the fact that you're supposed to figure out what type of hearing protection you need rather than just buying the first thing that you found at your supplier, then we might take formal action against you in the form of a letter, or I might just speak to you. If the risk assessment is non-existent and it looks like you're in a high noise environment and you're exposing people to risk, then you're in a position where you might get issued an improvement notice. There's another thing with this. So we're checking to make sure that you understand how much protection is needed. It's going to signify to us whether or not you've got a risk assessment, but it tells us something else. We don't want people to overprotect. We want to avoid people being given too much protection to such a stage where they cannot hear what's going on, and specifically they cannot hear warning signals or warning alarms or warning instructions. In our guidance document, a relatively short paragraph, it says protectors at reduced levels at the ear to below 70 dB should be avoided. since this overprotects and may cause difficulties with communication and hearing warning signals. That seems like quite a relatively small statement in quite a long document. The reality of this that I've had to go out and do investigations on, in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I've had 3 fatalities that I've worked as an inspector on, where people have been killed at their work because the hearing protection they've been given was overprotecting, and they were dragged into pieces of machinery or they were run over by vehicles on work sites. So what can you do about that? Well, here's an example of what one company was doing about it. So this individual here, he works on the bins, and sadly for him, he's sort of deaf in one ear. I think he used to be in the army, so he's got that sort of 1 ear deaf from using a gun. But when he's working on the bins, he's on the glass collection. So there's a lot of noise, followed by periods where there's not a lot of noise. And he has real difficulty in communicating in that situation. So they've issued him with a set of ear muffs that have got an attenuation system on them and a microphone that when the high noise level occurs, it cuts out the noise and protects him. And then when the noise level subsides, he can hear what's going on. And that stops him from doing dangerous things like stepping into oncoming vehicles. Because, and probably you don't know this, and I didn't know this, but apparently being a bin man is usually one of the top 10 most dangerous jobs in the UK. Now, the other thing that you probably need to be aware of is if you decide to go down the route of these types of products, not only are you required to make sure that it's maintained correctly as a hearing protector, you're now required to make sure that it's maintained correctly as a noise control device. So you need to make sure that it's working properly, you need to make sure that the microphone doesn't break. You also need to make sure that you're supplying this person with batteries so that you can continue to use it over the course of a shift. So this may not be something that you're aware of, but this is generally the understanding of the noise and vibration inspectors at HSE, that hearing protection is seen as an interim solution to a noise problem. That's how we think about it. Now, we're not naive enough to assume that every single workplace will eventually get to a point where they will never need to wear hearing protection, because some things are just noisy, some tools are noisy, but it is an aspiration when the regulations were written way back in the sort of late 80s, when that sort of set of regs came out, that we would expect people to use hearing protection, but over time work to reduce the noise exposure. And you know, the hearing protection was there as an interim solution while you worked on your control processes. Why is that? Well, if you go to the INVC website, they've got a little calculator on it that helps you work out what it costs you, what the actual cost of hearing protection can be. So you put in the type of protection you're using, the mean attenuation, you put in the wear rate, because obviously you should know that. You tell me whether or not you've got things that interfere with the seal on it. You tell me if they've had any training, any fit testing. You work out the cost of the hearing protection, you work out the actual real world attenuation, and then you throw in the cost of having to send off to your insurers a chunk of money to pay for a claim made against you. And they worked out for one case that you could be potentially looking at a £20,000 cost. So my question is, what would you rather do? Would you rather consistently spend money on hearing protection, which basically tries to control noise from a source that you're not trying to reduce, or do you spend that money trying to make that piece of machinery, that piece of equipment quieter? Right, well, that obviously leads us on to how do we actually do that. Now this here, understanding your level of risk and exposure, focus on control, this is our core message. It's the core message that you've heard in the last talk that I gave on hand-arm vibration. It's the core message for noise. This is what HSE, it's what the noise and vibration inspectors look for. Understanding level of risk and exposure, focusing on control. And the main thing that's going to get you where you need to be is to focus on control. That's the number one thing that you want to do. Okay, well, let's take a step back first of all and just say, well, what about understanding that level of risk? Let's say, for example, you're not sure, you don't have a real feel for whether or not you think a work task or a workplace is sufficiently noisy for you even to have a risk assessment and look at doing control measures. Is there a really simple way that we could figure it out? Well, happily, yes, there is. And the fact that we've all been told to try and stay 2 meters apart because of COVID is going to help you do this, because it's in our rule of thumb. And basically our rule of thumb says if you go into a noisy work environment and you stand 2 meters away from somebody, if you have to shout to talk, and it's probably about 85 dB, in 2 hours in that environment is going to put you at a stage where you need to have a risk assessment and think about controls and such like. In the good old days when we used to be able to stand a little bit closer to one another, if you were about 1 meter away, and you had to shout to be heard over the noise of the equipment or the machinery or the tool, then that noise level is probably about 90 dB and 45 minutes in that environment, and you're going to need a risk assessment. And 90 dB is roughly the sort of noise level at which most high frequency power tools start off at, and they significantly ramp up as you get higher up. So somebody's doing, say, media blasting, grip blasting, you know, the time it takes to get to the action values is so short for those types of tools that it's measured in, you know, fractions of minutes. So control. What can we do about control? Well, we've got the noise triangle similar to the vibration triangle, and it works on the same principles. If we can reduce the number of workers, we can reduce exposure. If we can reduce how long people spend in a high noise environment, we can reduce exposure. If we can reduce the level of noise, we can reduce exposure. So we expect to see companies trying to work on one or two or all three of these things, or combinations of them, in order to try and reduce noise exposure. You may ask, what is it that the HSE are looking for? We've got a thing called the Noise Topic Pack. You can Google this, you just noise Topic Pack HSE, it will come up. Inside this document are the things that our inspectors absolutely expect to see and will ask to see if they think there's a noise problem. So if you go on our website, you'll find loads and loads of advice on noise control and different things that can be done, and the top 10 noise control measures. The things that we will specifically ask for, because they're deemed to be reasonably practicable, are listed in this document, and they're listed by industry. So you can go in there, and if you work in woodworking, you can go and look that up and see the things that we're looking for. And you can marvel at how old some of them are and how out of date some of them seem to be. Things like, you know, low noise nozzles and silencers and that type of thing in maintenance. But we expect to see that, and you'd be surprised at how infrequently we see things that are on this list that are not being used. Now, admittedly, some of these things are difficult to do, and we also accept that some things may not be reasonably practicable for you to do because of the cost or the type of work that you do. But be aware that the way that we inspect now is that we do things called priority local inspections, PLIs. You'll hear inspectors talking about PLIs all the time. What we do is we say, right, we're going to go out for the next 3 months and we're going to spend all our time going to foundries. So the chances are the person who turns up, if they're doing foundry inspections, chances are the inspector has been out to other foundries and seen what your competitors are doing and seen how they are controlling their noise risk and their other risks. So if your reason for not doing something is it's not practicable for us to do, and he's seen it on the last 3 sites that he's been on, or they will ask you questions about why you think it's not reasonably practical for you, but it is for other competitors. The other thing that your inspector is going to ask you, she's going to ask you, have you got buy quiet? Have you put that in place? We absolutely expect you to be trying to buy quieter equipment and machinery and tools. We do not expect you to go into work tomorrow and throw all your stuff out and buy quieter things. We expect you to do it in a reasonable way. If things need to be replaced, you find things that are quieter. If you're thinking about changing something because you're going to get a new tool that's going to do the job better, you should be thinking about whether or not it's quieter. And primarily what we would really like to see is you buying a piece of equipment or piece of machinery that is as efficient or more efficient than the bit of equipment that you've currently got, and that's also quieter. That is essentially what we're hoping for you to be able to get. So if you have to buy something that's the same noise level or noisier because you don't really have any other option, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, we'll accept that, but we do expect you to be able to say, I've got a buy quiet scheme in place, and I'm going through a process of trying to buy quieter equipment. Now, we understand it's not easy to get decent noise data. The last time I asked, I found about 79–80% of people that I asked said it is difficult to find noise data from machinery and tool suppliers. The other thing to remember, though, is that they have a legal obligation under the supply regulations to give you information on their tools and machinery if it's noisy. If you're looking for a set of questions to ask your suppliers so that you can get that information, if you have a look at this website here, you'll get this thing called Buy Quiet. It's a cross-European thing, and so if you're whether you're buying the equipment for Europe or from the UK, they should still be applying this. They should still be able to answer the questions that are on this list. And it's really questions about the whole process of Buy Quiet is, do you as a company know what the noise levels are of the equipment you've got? When you come to buy new stuff, are you asking for that noise level? Is the company who's supplying you it telling you what the noise level is of the piece of equipment in use? We call it the residual risk. The residual risk, and the residual risk of noise from a piece of machinery would be the noise it makes while it's doing its job for the person that's using it. Ask those questions, because we'll ask about whether or not you've got Buy Quiet. The other thing we'll ask is, are you maintaining your sound control correctly? Now, for a lot of companies, they may not even be aware that they've got sound control measures in place, because the machinery is that old that nobody remembers that the thing that goes round about it isn't there just to stop you getting your fingers into it. It's also there to stop you, hearing noise. So what we're looking for, primarily this is going to come into things like enclosures. If you've got, viewing panels, have they been broken in? If they've got plastic skirts around the bottom of them, that's there to try and reduce noise breakout. Are they kept in good order? Are the seals round about enclosures in good order? Have you got isolation mounts on the feet of machinery? Are they in good condition? Those are the types of things that we're looking for. And if they're in poor condition, in the same way that if hearing protection's in poor condition, we'll take enforcement over it. And also, is it possible for you to alter your process? Now, that's quite a difficult one to answer, and it really needs to be quite a brave inspector who might ask this question, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility. So I'm going to show you a little example, a genuine example that we came across. So this is a company that we went into. They were buying in highly finished metal steel sheets with a protective film, and what they were doing was removing the film and then running over the top of it for a grinder to put a key in it so they could then paint it. Now that's quite a high noise task. It's also a high vibration task. So the inspector I was with, she was concerned that there was issues there with noise and vibration. And they say, well, what can you do about that? Have you got any options for control? Have you thought about your process? And they say, well, we thought about the process, and option one is that we go out and spend £150,000 on a piece of machinery. And that seems like quite an expensive way of dealing with that problem, but it potentially does make it more efficient and gets the work done quicker. Option number two is that they had a chat with the steel supplier who said, well, actually, I spend quite a lot of time finishing that up to a highly polished finish and putting some plastic on it so it doesn't get damaged. So I could stop doing that and, maybe charge you slightly less for it. So that was the two options. So which option do you think they go for? Now, normally I would ask you which one you think they would go for, and you'd probably say, oh, we'll go for option number two, Chris, because that's the most sensible thing to do. That's reasonably practical and not have to spend a fortune. But I also give you an option three in case you've got any ideas. And it was actually the person who was running the factory who came up with option three, because while he was talking to the paint supplier on the phone, they said to him, well, why are you doing that? We reformulated the paint 15 years ago, so you didn't have to put a key in it, so that it meant you got an easy, smooth finish when you were putting the stuff on. And the point about this is that, you've probably done things to change your processes that you did, and they had a knock-on effect to the noise exposure for your employees. And you should tell us about that. If we come along to site, you should take the time to say, well, yes, this isn't the quietest place in the world, but 5-10 years ago, it was significantly noisier, but we replaced this machine and that machine, and we do this differently, and that's reduced the noise because that's part of your process. And what I advise people to do, is personal advice that I give to duty holders, as I say, just get a piece of A4 paper, write down on it the things that you've changed over the years, which you know have made a difference to the noise level. Include in that list the things that you're hoping to do just now and that you're currently involved in. You're making sure that your noise control enclosures are well maintained, and then put a list of the things that you hope to do in the future. And maybe in 3 years' time, you're going to buy a new piece of equipment that's going to be quieter, but you're not going to buy it just now because the equipment you're using has got time to run on it. So thinking about that, thinking about your control process, and that's what our core message is. Understand your level of risk and exposure and focus on control. Okay, so that's the end of my talk, and I'm really happy to take any questions that anybody's got.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. Again, a really helpful, informative talk, as the as per the last one. At the moment, I've only got one question that's come through, and you've kind of alluded to it partway through the presentation, but I'll go through it anyway. How applicable and accurate is manufacturers' published noise data of power tools in real life, in your experience?
So I think particularly for power tools, there's the thing that they'll complain or they'll claim about is that, well, we don't know what you're going to use this for, so we may not be able to give you accurate data, so we'll maybe just provide you with some general information as to what the noise level is. For some tools, that might be the noise level of the tool suspended in mid-air, not actually working on any material, because that's what the standardized test is. For other tools, the standardized test actually creates higher levels of noise from the piece of equipment. So there's a lot of variation in it. But the thing to latch onto is that idea of residual risk, that they do have a requirement to produce that information, and they should be telling you that sort of information. Now, in terms of the accuracy of it, some of it is accurate, and there's another aspect of it, which is that some of it can be confusing. So if you're using outdoor machinery, you'll find that it may often have two noise levels. One will be the sound pressure level, which is what I'm looking for and what you're looking for. But you may also see on the side of a piece of machinery a sign that says LWA and then the noise level. In fact, if you ever look at if you've got a wheelie bin, if you ever look at the underside of the lid or somewhere on the lid, there'll be a symbol that will say LWA 98 dB. It tells you what the sound power level is from that bin when somebody shuts the lid. That's not very helpful for you, that LWA number, because that is a noise level that's completely, X of normal environment, and that has to be adjusted. You're looking for the sound pressure level, SPL, that's on it, and it should be the tool or the machinery in use. If you're finding that you can't get that information, first of all, tell them that they're legally required to give you that information. If they carry on saying that they can't give you it, the next step that we suggest is, well, go to your trade association or go to their trade association and say, I'm trying to buy this tool, I don't know what the noise level is from it, they're not complying with the machinery supply directives. If they then continue to not give you a decent answer, and the tool, specifically if the tools you think it's going to be so noisy that it could cause risk, then there's absolutely nothing to stop you from going onto the HSE's website or getting your trade association to go onto the HSE's website, go to our concerns page and raise it as a concern with us, because I do and other inspectors do go out to tool and machine suppliers and say, look, you need to provide this information. And we've chased people up. I've got a health and safety inspector in Australia to go and chase up a tool manufacturer to get them to provide data on their website so that people know this is what the noise level is, this is what the vibration level is from this piece of equipment.
Okay, that's really helpful. Also thinking about reducing noise in terms of processes for some of the noisy operations like fettling and grinding. Do you find that using potential methods for damping vibrations, such as using wooden surfaces, putting anti-vibration sort of neoprene mats, neoprene feet or mats in place, perhaps holding the object rather than the tool itself, does that have an equivalent sort of effect on noise reduction in the same way that it can do for vibration?
It can do. I mean, a lot of the noise that we get from metal is that it's allowed to vibrate and resonate, particularly if it's lighter weight panels. It's less of an issue for heavier weight steel. So maybe if you're doing fettling work on cast metals, that might not be too much of an issue, but certainly for lighter plate steel, it makes more of an issue. Things that I've seen people do, they've put down, dampening layers, so rubber, that type of thing. I've seen people using, if you've ever seen guys that work in jewellery shops, they use a thing they call a jeweler's, I can't see it, it's a pillow full of sand that they put the thing that they're working on and they hammer that. And I came across a manufacturer, so they're not making jewellery, but what they did was they went down to the local gym supplier and they got a load of these. They were basically big bags that were full of sand, so not sandbags, but they were bags full of sand that people used to work out with. And they would put them down on the table before they then put the metal working down to work that. And I've also seen other companies where they'll get G clamps, the quick release ones that you can ratchet up, and they'll put rubber plates on them, so clamped up the piece of the work equipment before they went to start hammering about with it, and then worked on it that way. In terms of reducing noise from fettling and grinding, there's not a lot of options you can do. If you've decided that's the way you're going to do it, then it's going to create a noise. Get a lot of companies where they do a lot of fettling work and then realise actually if we just ran it through the CNC milling machine and with a bit more accuracy, we wouldn't need to do the fettling at all. So that's one of the things that we think a lot of companies now doing, because it also makes the product more, when they make it every time, it's the same sort of quality. And also things like companies moving over to things like linishers, where they've got the equipment off, that can tend to be quieter. But you're kind of limited once you've decided that the only way that you're going to be able to dress this product is with a grinder. You're kind of limited, and you're in a position where that is going to create quite a bit of noise.
And in terms of enforcement actions, when inspectors are on site, what tends to be the greatest aspect? Is it a failure of risk assessment and then putting control measures in place, or do you tend to find more due to not getting the health surveillance right, or not even doing health surveillance?
In the past, particularly for noise in the past, the HSE has asked, we've taken failures on risk assessment. We've done that. Now, partly the reason for that was when we brought out the 2005 regulations, more so for harms than for noise. We thought, look, we need to give people a bit of time for this to bed in. So we spent quite a lot of time saying, look, get a risk assessment, and then next time we come and see you, we'll ask you what you're doing about control. And I think that the problem with that was that the kind of message got out was that HSE is looking for risk assessments, when actually what we're looking for is control. So the things that we will go for, if we see something that's wrong, if we see that that it's high noise and there's definitely something that you could be doing about it, we'll take you on control. The thing that the inspector is likely to give you action on are the things that I spoke about, and primarily that hearing protection activity, because it's kind of low-hanging fruit for them. It's noise sign says you should be wearing hearing protection, you're not wearing hearing protection, they're going to go at you for that. Now, they may just have a word with you, but they'll certainly take some sort of action if they see that type of thing. But yeah, okay.
Okay, we've had a few more questions come through. I had an employee who had a cochlear ear implant, as he has no hearing at all. He doesn't wear hearing protection as he essentially has no hearing to damage. Is this acceptable?
Yeah, that's you had that one a few times in the past. And it's particularly for cochlear ear implants, because they literally do not have any hearing whatsoever. I know for other people that have got hearing aids, and even some people that are classed as profoundly deaf, they still have a residual amount of hearing, and there is an expectation that even if someone has a residual amount of hearing, that should be protected. Now, what you'll hear us say, and it does seem a bit of a strange one, is that if you've got an area that's classed as a hearing protection zone, so everybody in there has to wear hearing protection, and that person is not wearing hearing protection, then it might be construed that it's okay to not wear hearing protection because this particular individual is wearing it. So as long as if everybody understands, well, there's that person, we all know that they've got the cochlear ear implants, then it's not an issue. But if it's a workplace where you maybe have a lot of people coming in and out for different reasons, then we have seen employers saying, look, we're just going to get you to wear them anyway, just so people know that this is a hearing protection zone without any exception. And my kind of opinion on that as well, if he's happy to wear them, it's not really making any difference, then okay. So I think the employer themselves should take a kind of approach on it. For people who do have a residual sort of hearing, like that chap that I showed you on the bins, he was actually wearing he had a hearing aid in his ear, and he was wearing that hearing protection over the top. And if you go on I think it's the UK Hearing Conservation Association, UK Hearing Conservation Association, if you look up them, if you go on their website under the workplace page, you can go right down at the bottom. They've got an advice document that tells you how to deal with making sure people who've got some residual hearing but still have to wear a hearing aid, how to make sure that they're kept safe in high noise environments.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you for that. I'll have a look at that and get some information out to members on that. Another one that's in some sites insist that a person visits insist that hearing protection is worn in mandatory areas, even if the process isn't running. Should they actually be doing this?
Right, so that kind of comes back to that thing about that I said about taking the hearing protection off, and also is it a hearing protection zone? If it's a hearing protection zone, then it's a hearing protection zone when it's noisy, and we don't want people to overprotect. We don't want people to walk about with hearing protection on, and then they can't hear warning signals and stuff like that. And there's a very clear risk of that if you're doing it in these types of areas. You can get signs which change, they come on and go off depending on whether the machinery is in use. And generally the expectation for hearing protection zones is this is a place where we fully expect it to be noisy. And if that's going to change across the course of the day, what I tend to say is, the view that I tend to take is, well, look, I'm not going to expect you to wear hearing protection in, say, a small woodworking shop when none of the machines are running, but certainly when they are in operation, you should have some sort of protocol in place to say, look, we're switching this on, it's going to get noisy, we need to make sure everybody's got the hearing protection on. But yeah, I mean, I think you need to be sensible about it, and you don't want to create other risks, like that overprotection risk.
Okay. Next question. If a person is using a piece of equipment, for example, 15 to 30 minutes every 2 weeks at an 85 dB noise level, for instance, is health surveillance required?
Well, so if he's not doing anything else, so you know that you can average, if you have a look at our noise calculators, you can average them daily or over the course of a week. So if you're saying that he's only spending, a couple of days a week or a couple of hours a week using a high noise piece of equipment, you can go online, use the weekly noise exposure calculator, and it will tell you whether or not that person is going to be above the lower, the upper, or the limit value for noise. So once you've done that, that will tell you whether or not where they sit in terms of their exposure, and you can then decide, do I need to provide health surveillance? Health surveillance, as I said, generally comes in when they're above the upper exposure action value, okay? But we still expect people to get health surveillance if they're exposed to noise between the lower and upper exposure action value, and they have what we class as they're sensitive to noise. Now, sensitive to noise to us means somebody who's already got hearing loss, somebody who might not have hearing loss, but the process you've got might be using chemicals that could affect somebody's hearing, called ototoxins, or it could be somebody who has a health condition that is likely to make them more prone to hearing loss. And the most obvious one, I don't know if you'd strictly class it as a health condition, that's maybe the wrong term, but I do know that it is possible for women when they're pregnant to be more susceptible to getting hearing loss during that period.
You raised a really interesting point there on ototoxins and medication and susceptibility and things along those lines. Is there a simple area or signposting that you could actually offer to people on where they could get more information about this?
I'll be freely admit, the HSE doesn't have a great offering on it. I'm pretty sure the Australian Health and Safety Service have got a document on it for ototoxins. And we do have a list, but I don't think it's on our website. So that's clearly something that we need to sort out. But I think it's either the Australian or the New Zealand Health and Safety Regulator has got a list of what they've defined as, clearly are ototoxins. But ultimately, you should be looking at it as part of your cost assessment. And if you're going to be using chemicals to such an extent that it might cause that kind of damage, then it should be listed on the cost sheet for the product.
And it can also be quite an issue in terms of prescription medication that people take as well, because some people taking high performance pain killing medication such as tramadols, gabapentins, pregabapentins and things along those lines can have these kind of effects from it as well, and yet it doesn't get very well signposted in the leaflet that comes with the medication from that point of view. So would that be something like like the NHS or BOHS that might have more information on that?
Yeah, and I think that's probably where having good quality health surveillance comes in, because a good health surveillance provider will ask the person about their sort of underlying medical conditions and help you understand that. And the good thing about that as well is that you probably want, as an employer, you probably want to avoid asking people about their health conditions because you're not a medical practitioner, and you probably don't want to thinking, well, everybody's going to know about this in sort of 6 weeks' time once it's went round the office. So I think that's the benefit of having good quality health surveillance, is that if they run through the process of the hearing, they do the initial setup test, figure out whether you've got any issues, and you should ask questions like that, and what kind of medication.
Okay, well, that's all the questions we've got in at the moment. We've got nothing in the chat. So what we could do, we've got about 10 minutes or so left on the session, we could unmute the audience, and then if anyone actually would like to ask a question directly, we could do that if you could do that, Charlotte.
Yep, I'm just bear with me 1 second. I think I know how to do this. Here we go. Unmute. Yeah. Okay, so I'm unmuting everyone. But I think you can individually control it yourselves as well. So yeah, I think people still have to individually unmute themselves maybe, but you should all be able to do that now. So if anyone does have any other questions, please do.
Hello, Chris. Can you hear me? It's Sue.
Oh, hi, Sue. How are you?
Hello. I'm an occupational health advisor. So I don't know if you're the person.
Oh. What's going on? Sorry, Anna. Sorry, I
Can
don't
you
know
hear
whether
me again now?
Yeah, I'm not going to touch anything. Sorry.
So I'll start again. So it's a question in relation to information that has got to be on the health records for employee following health surveillance. And I just wondered if the HSE had got any thought about whether that recommended information needs changing, because you're asking for quite a lot of personal information, such as gender, permanent address. I mean, national insurance number. I know you'll need some personal detail, but is it all still thought to be necessary?
Well, yeah, I'm probably not the best person to talk about that, and we've got occupational health inspectors that are, totally on that. So I'm not sure, but yes, certainly the. I'm not sure you're asking about the sort of things that you would ask as an occupational health practitioner to the person, and a lot of that. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's information that's on the HSE website that has got to be on a employee's health record, which is like the certificate that goes back to the company, and it's a lot of personal data, and I just wondered if it had been reviewed. But obviously, if you're not the person to ask, I'll raise it in a different way.
I will ask for you, Sue. I will find out. But yeah, because I know one of the things that I'm aware of, and one of the reasons why I kind of rely quite heavily on our occupational health inspectors is they are all, practitioners. They've all got a medical qualification, because it means that if I want somebody to go and have a look at health records to tell me, what's the overall implication of them, I can't do that myself. It has to be somebody who's a medical practitioner to look at these medical incompetence documents. So I know HSE is very keen to make sure that medical incompetence information is kept away from, well, even from me, but also from the employer, and that when the employer gets the information back, that it's essentially like a fit slip that says, so-and-so can or cannot work, and this is the sort of thing that they can do. And if they've got...
It's that fit slip, it's that information that's got to be on the fit slip, which is like surname, forename, gender, date of birth, address, national insurance number. It just seems too much.
Right. Well, I will ask about that, Sue, because I know that they are they're certainly looking at some of the things around about what's expected and what should be provided. So
that's great. Thanks. It's under record keeping on the HSE website. Yeah.
Okay, I will find out.
One of our
yeah.
sorry to interrupt.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt there, Chris. One of our other listeners in has actually said the national insurance number is an identifier for HS outcome records. And at the same time, this person also asked the question: is what is the current guidance post-COVID in terms of risk management for surveillance?
Well, after COVID, hopefully it's back to normal. I think I'm guessing you're saying, well, how do we actually go around the process of doing health surveillance just now, while people are kind of on lockdown and such like. And I know that there has been allowances to let people, hold off on doing some of this stuff, but there is an expectation that we should be going back to it, and that the people that are offering audiometric testing, that type of thing, are doing it in a COVID secure way. I do know from speaking to some audiologists that they've devised setups and systems in their practices where they can do audiometrics without, breaching or having sufficient mitigation for control for COVID. So, but, I don't know about other health issues and how they're getting around that. But I do know that there's some of the audiologists have figured out ways of making sure that they're COVID secure. So okay. I'm not usually great with occupational health stuff. I apologise for that.
No, that's fine. We appreciate the time and the answers from that anyway. Has anybody got? Would anybody like to unmute themselves and ask Chris a question directly?
I can see that Sue Chantry has a hand raised. So I think you might need to unmute yourself, Sue.
Hello, thank you for a really interesting presentation. I'm Sue Chantry. I am an occupational health nurse. I'd raised my hand because I'd asked those questions about returning to audiology following kind of COVID risk management process. A lot of our guys, I work in motorsport, so a lot of us, we've done a year's paper screening. They're just about to go racing again, and I just wanted to be sure that I could kind of return to doing their audiology under COVID risk safety guidance. So actually you've answered my question, but overall thank you very much for clarifying some points.
Thanks.
And I can see that Tony Baker's got his hand up. Tony, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask Chris a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yay. I'd just like to know your view, Chris, on audiometric testing over the phone. Obviously, we're in a COVID situation at the moment, and a lot of providers won't come in and carry out the audiometric testing. So, what's your view?
Yeah, we had quite a few discussions about this. So, and there seems to be quite a few more systems on the market now, and I came across some people that were sending systems out and phone apps and that type of thing. As I say, there was a sabbatical. That was the expectation. That was allowed to do that. The things that people are using as remote systems, we are not hugely enamoured with some of them. And from what we've seen from speaking to them, when we say, well, is this actually an audiometric test that you're providing, or is it some sort of filtering regime? The ones we've spoken to, it may not be the one that you're talking about, but the ones we've spoken to have said, no, we're not testing here, we're filtering stuff. Sorry, you saying something?
I was just, they're just asking questions over the phone, so yeah. I don't understand how you can base an audiometric test on questions.
I don't.
I find this quite difficult myself.
I don't think they are. I think I would ask them if they are actually providing audiometric testing, or whether they're providing some sort of additional filtering system to find out who might have a problem. In the same way that you get a questionnaire to filter out, right, this person needs to go and see the audiologist, and then go and see the diagnosing person. So I think the ones that I've seen, and I say it mean, that I don't know, I can't vouch for the one that you're talking about, but the ones that I've seen, when you ask them about it, they're not saying this is an audiometric test which will definitively hearing loss. they're saying, no, this is a way of filtering people out and figuring out who you absolutely have to send for a test, so you can limit the number of people that you send and that type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, for me, fundamentally, I'm expecting testing done in a controlled environment. So I would question how you can do that down the phone unless you've got, you know that the equipment's specific specification and the room's a specific specification.
Yeah, because we've got a specific noise booth, so yeah.
Yeah, that's what.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Right, well, we've just come up to 3 o'clock, and at the moment I can't see any more questions in either the chat box or hands raised or in the questions and answer box. So I think this is probably an appropriate time to end. I would like to thank Chris very much for another excellent presentation. Focus more about the practical application and things that people can do rather than just around legislation. I think that helps give people a lot more confidence when they see and hear examples of things that can actually be done. And likewise, I'd also like to thank Charlotte for stepping in and to help out, because I know Danny had got another meeting today as well. So thank you very much to Simply People for hosting the session again today and recording it for us. So as Charlotte mentioned earlier on, there will be a link to this recording available soon on the Simply People website for the CMF members and Shift members. I know that Danny will send us the link through. I will send that on to you along with any other information that arises from today. But in the meantime, yes, thank you very much to Chris and to Charlotte. I hope everyone's enjoyed the session today as much as I have. Hopefully we're now all gradually on our way out of lockdown, and we might all be able to return to some form of normality fairly soon. So thank you very much for the time today. I hope everybody, their loved ones, friends, families and colleagues manages to stay safe, and please, if you're offered the vaccine, take it up. Make sure all the time while we're still in this phase that you have your COVID secure measures in place, because the HSE are still visiting and inspecting on these matters. So we can't assume that business is automatically going to be as it was before. And with that, I will say goodbye to everybody. Thank you very much for attending.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks very much, Chris and Richard.
Yeah, thank you all, and Chris. Thank you.